All right, well, thank you all for tuning in. This is the recorded version of the Southern Colorado Grasshopper Management class for 2025. This is the recorded version of the class given on March 28th. However, it's not a live version as the recording audio that I'd used during that class did not fully work and compute when trying to upload it. So this is a completely re-recorded session for the class. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So with that, this is just the Colorado State University Extension Equal Opportunity Provider slide. This is where we state we don't discriminate on the basis of disability, and we're committed to providing reasonable accommodations. And then if you're curious about CSU's Principles of Community or the land acknowledgement, you're welcome to Google it, or you can look at that link through the slides. And then today I will be the one going over the topic. So my name is Beth Hayes. I'm the Pueblo Colorado State University Extension Agriculture, Small Acreage, and Natural Resource Specialist. And these are kind of the topics we're going to cover today. So with that, I kind of needed us to go back in time a little bit before we can talk about what is the expected outcome for this year for 2025. So every year, the USDA and a division of it called APHIS, which is Animal Plant Health Division, sends out what is called a hazard map. And this is for the entire United States for grasshoppers and Mormon crickets. In 2023, you can see that circled area, that red area, that is where Pueblo is located. The darker the color, the more higher the numbers are when they did the counts in the survey. So the lower the color, you can see that blue, that green. Blue is really the ideal color that we're looking for. So in 2023, we were looking pretty good. You can see there, again, this is the 2024 map. We start to have some red spots in our portion of the state, including up in the northeastern side. And then here in 2025, more red, unfortunately, throughout our state, but you can see in our section of the map, not as bright as what we saw last year as I go back one slide. So you can see Pueblo was definitely a hot spot last year, and we are still expected to have some dark color, but not nearly as bad just because of the climate conditions that we had over the winter and our slower start to spring, which is really nice. And we'll kind of talk about that as we go through that. So definitely higher numbers and more than just a handful in your garden or your rangeland, but not nearly as bad as what we saw last year. So the other thing they do is they do surveys every year. So they do both adult surveys and nymphs. So nymphs are ones that cannot fly, that do not have fully developed wings. Adults can fully fly and have fully developed wings. So those are the two differences. So here you can see Pueblo there. Again, the darker the color, the worse it is. So you can see our dark color there in the red throughout our county, and they do these surveys on public land only. So that kind of gives you an idea of if the public land is pretty highly intensified, then we are also expecting that from a private property standpoint as well. So this is the 2023. And so this was 2024. So this is our nymphs that you can see here. So these are the immature, they can't fly. Lots of red, which is a pretty high number. If we go back one slide, you can see that's 15 plus for every square yard. That's a lot. So for nymphs, immature, they cannot fly. That's really high in our county. That's a big area of concern because most of those are going to turn into adults and therefore also reproduce. So those are really high numbers. And then you can see all along the eastern side of our state, we're just as high in numbers, unfortunately. So this is 2023. You can see the adults, again, high numbers, specifically in our area in Pueblo. And then in 2024, again, high numbers for adults. So if we go back to 2024, so this is our nymph one for 2024. These are the babies. They cannot fly. They are immature, very dark in color. And then this is our adult survey where, again, you can see there's lots of red, more green and yellow. But that, again, you have to remember these counts were done on public land. So this doesn't fully capture the private property land that you all saw and the impacts you all were sawing. And we'll get to that in a little bit later of the discussion about why it's important that you guys will access the form I'm going to send out in the next week or so we can start having some good data about what is happening on private property outside of what we can see on the public side. So moving on, you can see that in 2024, a big part of Grasshopper talk is drought and that impact of that, not only from a climate perspective, but an infestation impact. Drought is important because when there's drought, there's less plant life, and grasshoppers will naturally migrate and live where there is the most plant life for them to eat on, which of course is in our backyards, in our cropland, and in our rangeland, because that's where we're purposely putting water, and that's where they're going to flock to. So last year we had really high infestation levels because we warmed up really quickly in February, and then we stayed warm and dry. And then we kind of had a very mild winter for 2023, which was perfect for them. And that kind of created this perfect storm of everything. So that's kind of why we were seeing the levels we saw last year, just because we kind of created the perfect storm from them from that perspective. So then this is a side-by-side comparison from 2024 to March of 2025, when this class was given about a week or so ago. And you can see that we're a little drier. The area circled in red is Pueblo County specifically, with the Arkansas River running through it. You can see that the white means that we're not in a drought from the requirements and the guidance given by the Colorado Drought Monitor. The darker again the color, the worse their drought area is. So you can see around us is starting to dry out pretty good, but not as bad in Pueblo. We're still sitting pretty okay. But we've had a slower spring, a cooler spring, which is really beneficial to us when we talk about grasshopper impacts. So when we talk about grasshoppers, how we count them, why is this important? We break them out into two stages. So there's nymphs, which again are those immature, they can't fly, which are broken out by instars, which is the size of their wing pad. That's what an instar means. And then adults, which are fully formed. They have wings and they can fly. There is only one species that when they are adults they cannot fly, but they have fully developed wings, and we'll talk about that as we go through our species. Again, these surveys that we saw for the maps are done on public land unless they're given specific permission for access to private, and they send out their surveyors out in May, which as we all know is kind of late in the game as far as grasshoppers are concerned. But they really do need more access to count. So I do encourage you to look for that form I'm going to send out in the next week or so that if you do have high numbers again, we can get those counts done properly on private property to update those maps, as that really tells the state government and the federal government what's happening on our state and possibly what funding we may need to deal with these higher levels of infestation. So again, this is the 2023 nymph map, that immature map that cannot fly. Again, we can see that green is kind of the main color we want to look for, or even blue, which is like 0, which is nice. But that green is 3 to 7, yellow is 8 to 14, the dark red is 15 plus, and you can kind of see how we have a lot of reds even on just public land throughout our county in 2023 as immatures. This is our county map from a 2023 adult standpoint. Again, those 15 plus as the reds are pretty scattered, but pretty close from what we saw in location from the babies here on the one map. So if you are seeing those immatures, there's a really high chance a lot of them are going to hit maturity as adults and cause those high numbers. So just something to keep in mind. We see here in 2024 a lot more nymphs, which you all are aware of. And then again as adults. So that's why we really need to have those surveys up and going, because what we'd like to do is turn most of this county blue, where we're really seeing, well, if it's gray, I apologize, on the earlier slide I said if it was blue it was none. It's actually gray means there's 0, and blue is 1 to 2. So we're really aiming to have this county mostly green and blue. That's what we're aiming for. We really don't want to, and maybe a few yellows scattered throughout. We really don't want to be seeing as many reds as what we see here. All right, so talking from a climate perspective, there's a lot of impact. So temperature is the biggest deal with grasshoppers. They are impacted by precipitation and vegetation throughout the year, but temperature is really the big one. So grasshoppers thrive the most when we have a mild winter with medium snow, but not a lot of heavy cold that seeps into the ground where we have multiple days of negative temperatures. That's really what affects them. Snow acts as an insulator. It doesn't have really that big of an impact on them. So we really want the deep cold, those cold temperatures is what we need. It's less about snow. And then in the springtime, if we have a hot spring, they hatch early, we have fast development, we have a lot of hatching cycles. If we have a slower start to spring where it's a little wetter, it's a little colder, kind of what we're seeing now, they hatch later and they have slower development. So we have less numbers because they don't get started as soon, and not as many eggs of those will hatch just because they kind of time out from a biology perspective. So that's kind of where that's helpful. And then drought has a little bit of an impact, but we're talking where they would need multiple years of extreme drought to have slow egg development, which we have had pretty extensive drought in the West, but not to the amount that grasshopper specifically would need to kind of have an impact level of what we're seeing in Colorado specifically. And then the earlier the plant life, the easier it is for them to survive. So again, that's kind of what we look at from a climate perspective. And then the climate warming. There's been a lot of studies done recently that the range expansions of several grasshopper species have grown. And if you noticed on our earlier slides when we were looking at those big USDA nationwide maps, you could see the numbers coming from the states that are to the east of us. They really started impacting us and kind of coming into Colorado. So that kind of also explains why we saw those numbers specifically on that side, because they're coming from other states. So that's something else I think about, is that this isn't just a Colorado problem or even just a Pueblo County problem. It's a multiple state issue just because of the various large scale climate factors that are kind of driving them to move. So the couple maps that you see here are from the US Drought Monitor, but you can pick your area specifically and it will give you 30-day precipitation and 30-day temperatures. So I kind of wanted to highlight these to just kind of show where we're standing. Again, these were for March, not April, but it was showing that, you know, we're sitting at pretty dark, almost 0% of normal precipitation. We're pretty dry is what it's showing, and it doesn't look like that's really going to change a whole lot when this map was done. Same thing with temperature. We're not like super warm. We're also not super cold either. There are definitely pockets of warmer that you can see more towards Pueblo West in the northern side of our county, and then to the western side towards Fremont and Custer County. So that's also just something to think about, because grasshoppers hatch when it warms up sooner rather than later. So warm and dry is kind of the grasshopper playtime. So just wanting to talk about the why of everything, of why is this happening on a larger scale, and part of that is the reason why is the biggest issue is because we switched, right? We were originally in El Nino until this year, where we switched to La Nina, but it's a weak La Nina impact for Colorado. And that does have some impacts as far as like what our year is going to look like from a weather perspective, from a vegetation perspective, precipitation, temperature, all those things. And to better explain it than what I can, the NOAA Weather Station has put together a really quick, easy video that explains a lot of that, and I'll play that now, and then we can kind of talk about it.
Warmer or colder than average ocean temperatures in one part of the world can influence weather around the globe. Boggles the mind, right? Here's how it works. During normal conditions, trade winds, which blow from east to west, push warm surface waters towards Asia, piling it up in the western Pacific. In some years, though, the trade winds weaken. The warm surface water moves eastward and reduces upwelling of cold water off the coast of South America. Climatologists call this El Nino. Its climate impacts show up mostly in the wintertime over North America. The warmer ocean fuels an intensification and southward shift of the jet stream. This brings flooding to the southern United States and warmer, drier conditions over parts of the Pacific Northwest, northern US, and Canada. But eventually, those trade winds pick up again and sometimes become even stronger than normal. When that happens, they blow the warm water back into the western Pacific and restart the upwelling of cool water towards the surface in the eastern Pacific. These strong trade winds are a signature of what is called La Nina. unusually cold conditions in the tropical Pacific that displace the jet stream northward. La Nina can lead to drought in the southern U.S. and cooler temperatures, heavy rains, and flooding in the Pacific Northwest. El Nino and La Nina together are part of a cycle that influences extreme weather and can impact food production, water supply, and even human health, not just in the U.S., but in many parts of the globe.
Okay, so with that, you guys can kind of see how that has a big impact on everything. So just again, El Nino, warm water is pushed back east towards the west coast. La Nina is the vice versa of that. So what does that mean for Colorado? So Colorado is here on the map where my mouse is. And so you can see in El Nino, we have like warm and wet. We're kind of smushed between, but really not a whole lot of wet because it's pretty far to the south of us on a big map of the United States, but we're getting a lot of that warmth, which is, where we get a lot of the drought from. Switching to La Nina, now we're stuck between cold and dry underneath. But again, really just kind of in between. And because the experts were saying that we have a pretty weak La Nina impact, we're not really being like extremely cold and we're not being extremely dry either. We're just having an average year when we think about a larger climate perspective. So when we talk about that, that's kind of what we're meaning when we say, well, we'll have to kind of see what the weather does because of the shift to La Nina. So if you hear that in context to grasshoppers, that's kind of what we're talking about. But as you can see with where Colorado sits, it won't have a super strong impact one way or the other. So then moving on to just talking about grasshoppers in general. So it's really important that you can identify what is a grasshopper. A lot of people have a hard time with that, and not knowing what is a grasshopper can make it difficult for you to manage. Because if you think something is a grasshopper, you start doing a lot of management, you can wind up really hurting the ecosystem and then causing actual grasshoppers to come in and fill that gap where there used to be other insects. So knowing what is a grasshopper and what is not is pretty key. So there are things that are related to grasshoppers. They're katydids and crickets. Katydids are the ones at the top picture. It looks like a leaf. A lot of people also call them leaf hoppers. They're very similar to grasshoppers, but they are not the same insect. They don't have the same damage or threshold issues that we see with grasshoppers. Same thing with crickets. Again, not really the same deal. And then with crickets, the big thing is you can see that they do have spikes on the back of their legs like a grasshopper does, but unlike a grasshopper, crickets use those to make noise based off temperature, and they have really long antennae. Grasshoppers have short antennae. They do not make noise. Outside of some species, their wings make noise when they fly, but otherwise they don't make any noise when they are just out there in the fields. So that's kind of the big thing. So just things to keep aware of. In all species of grasshoppers, the females are larger than the males, and that has to do from a reproductive purpose. They are most active during the day, but they will feed at night, so just keep that in mind. They don't have nests or territories. They do have some known predators, and we'll kind of get into those. And you can definitely, if you want to go more of an organic or more of just a holistic ecosystem management, you can definitely encourage these different predators to take up residence on your property to help you manage that grasshopper threshold. So talking about life cycles, so there's around 11,000 species of grasshoppers in the United States in total. We have over 100 plus in Colorado. And as of February, 16 new species were found in the south around the Mississippi area by a university extension specialist. So there's always more to see when it comes to grasshoppers. Their eggs are typically laid in the soil in late summer, early fall. In our area specifically, in Pueblo, we start seeing eggs being laid in late September, even sometimes earlier, and then the adults get killed off by first frost, which is typically around Halloween, and then they hatch in March or April, generally, depending on how quickly we warm up with a springtime. They hatch anytime when it's over 50 degrees is prime hatching weather for them, so just keep that in mind when we think of like when is spring truly happening. And then that nymph stage, what we've talked a lot about, you can see on this really nice image of what is a nymph. And it does talk about how that first and second instar nymphs are usually less than 3/8 of an inch long and no wing pad. And then third and fourth instars, you have 3/8 to a ½ inch long. They have small wing pads. You can see it starting to come out there. And then fifth instars are usually more than ½ an inch long. And then, we kind of enter that fully adult stage. When they are fully adults, their exoskeleton fully hardens, and that makes it where management, even from a chemical perspective, is very difficult because it doesn't allow for anything to enter their system from an external perspective. It is more where they have to eat something, ingest it, something like that, because that exoskeleton is like armor. Nothing's really going to get through it for the most part. We did see some anomalies last year where a lot of species, their exoskeleton was not hardening, but talking with some experts from the USDA, APHIS, and other states, it sounds like that might have been a mineral deficiency in both our plants and our soil, which is a completely different conversation, but something to keep note of. On this slide, you can also see like the life cycle hatching. So these are the eggs you see here. They pop out and then they grow. How fast they grow depends on the species, but most of them, they are fully formed adults in a matter of weeks. It just depends on how many molting stages they go through, is what determines how fast they can go to an adult, and they have fully functioning wings, like you can see here at the end. And then you can see here below the one that has the wings, you can see the female laying eggs. So with that deposit, so that's also why the females are bigger, because they have to get down, and it's not very deep. It's less than the first inch of soil that they'll lay their eggs, or they stick them onto leaves. If there's a lot of leaf litter, stuff like that, that's kind of where they like to have them. All right. Life stage and species identification. So knowing what life stage and species you have is key in management and proper control methods. Again, this is because we just talked about that adults aren't really affected by spray, so you're just going out and burning your money. You need to know the wing pad and body length are the big ways to know life stage. And then there's 3 main subfamilies of grasshoppers. There's slant-faced, spur-throated, and banged-winged. And on the next slide, I'll show you pictures of those. It's important to know which ones are which, because one, for identification, not all grasshoppers eat the same thing. So if you know what species you have, you know what life stage you have the most ability to implement management control methods. So that's why this is really important. So slant-faced, they're brown or gray nymphs. So those are immatures, right? They have clear wings. They have big heads and slanted faces when you're looking straight at them from a profile perspective. Spur-throated, they're green as nymphs. It doesn't mean they stay green, though, as adults. And then they have a spur or a spine on their throat between their front legs, and you'll see that on the next slide. Bang-winged, they have bright red or yellow hind wings as adults. A lot of you have seen those. They're adults in early spring, and then they have more hatching cycles later in the summer where you'll see more nymphs again. So, again, different life cycles, different species. So here again, that importance of instars. So it's the growth of the wing pad. So on some of the handouts that will be listed with this, you really want to look at, and especially because mobility increases, right? And where insecticide effectiveness, goes down on the 5th instar, that 1 inch. So knowing sizes is really important. And I know a lot of people are like, I don't want to go out and count. I don't want to go out and look at them. But if you're not going to be able to properly manage them, and you're going to wind up either spending money you don't need to, or you're just really not going to have that much of an impact. You're still going to lose a lot of plant life. So that's why this stuff is really important. And I do have specific handouts that have these images more blown up, so you can make these as big as you need to, or print them out and for easy identification purposes when you're looking at grasshoppers in the field. Here we have our 3 subspecies we talked about on the earlier slide. So again, slant-faced, right? Big heads. You can see it's very slanted from that profile one. Spur-throated. So this is what they look like as a full-blown adult. But then you see where the blue arrow is, that little notch right there. That's the spur-throat. That's where their name comes from. And then the bang-winged. A lot of you guys have seen these, right? They have bright, colorful legs, very clear wings, and that's what they look like. So again, these are our 3 main subspecies. And then these are, this is not an extensive list. There's a lot of other grasshoppers in Colorado. A lot of you guys have even brought up, like, there's some that are black. And they're like, I thought it was a cricket, but it turns out it's a grasshopper. We do have black grasshoppers. They're called ebony grasshoppers. So sometimes, yeah, it may look like a cricket, but it could be a grasshopper. And you just want to remember those differences with antenna size, mouth part, and then the back legs. And how well they can fly versus hop is kind of how you figure out if it's a grasshopper versus a cricket, if you really can't tell from color. So a lot of you have mostly seen the differential grasshopper, the clear-winged grasshopper, red-legged, 2-striped, a lot of green-streaked, and then there was another green one that had a really big hump right behind its head region. that is the green crested grasshopper. So that kind of, a lot of people compare it to a dinosaur. So that was the other one. I just don't have an image of it here in this particular slide. The plains lover homesteader one is that one I brought up earlier about the wings. So this one, as you can see, it does have fully formed wings as an adult, but because of its body mass, it is one of the few species that cannot fly as an adult because their wings are too small for its body mass. So they do have fully formed wings, but they cannot fly because they're just too big, too heavy as an adult. And they are also the ones that birds have the most issue with because of their tar-like substance. So when we get into birds, we'll talk about why does your species matter and why knowing what types of birds to encourage to your property from an organic perspective or even an ecological management perspective matters because of the species that you are dealing with. Here kind of gives you why the species matter. So like the differential grasshopper, right? It's one of the first grasshoppers found and it has the largest genus. Migratory grasshoppers are the most damaging to croplands. They are early hatching species. They're capable of long migration flight. Two-striped, they're really bad for gardens. They migrate from empty lots, roadsides, other disturbed sites. They really like open, disturbed areas. So like if you're somewhere near a construction zone or maybe your neighbor is doing a lot of work in their yard, probably going to have a lot of two-striped, right? They hatch in late spring and then a few weeks later, you have to deal with a lot of grasshoppers. So this is different from the differential one, right? Because these guys, they kind of hatch early and then they stay there. These guys, the two-striped, they will migrate, right? So these are ones that you may not have to deal with first thing, but as the season really gets going, your plants really start to thrive, they might come. Or if your neighbor or even wherever you live starts to have a lot of disturbance for whatever reason, could also increase their activity. And then red-legged, we saw those on the other slide. They feed on many garden plants and they are most abundant in moist sites. And they're one of the later hatching species. So again, these are important to know what is hatching where, hatching when, what are they eating. And then clear-winged, they're really restricted to feeding on grasses. So they don't eat a lot of other plants, which is beneficial again from a management perspective and how you want to deal with them. So knowing your species matters, knowing your life stage is important, and knowing what instars are and how to count them is the other big piece of this. Again, this bigger sheet is from the CSU Extension fact sheet on grasshoppers, which again will be linked in coordination with this webinar. All right, so now you're out in the field, you're looking at your grasshoppers, you're trying to count, you're trying to look at those instars, and you're like, well, there's over 100 plus species, right? And I, for one, do not know all of them. I know a lot of them, but I'm not the best at it. So what can you do? There's a lot of handouts that will be linked in this, but you can also go to the grasshoppers of the Western United States and compare the ones you are seeing on the ones they have linked on their website, which is really helpful. You can also go to identificationtools.org for grasshoppers specifically. That's another good way to get to the same site, and you can kind of go through that. And what you'll see is it says it offers 2 separate keys to identify both adult and pre-adult stages. So very, very helpful. All right. So when we talk about grasshoppers, the biggest thing we have to remember is the goal is not eradication, it's management. It's what is that acceptable threshold for your goals for your property. Because with grasshoppers, you're never going to win the war. This is a multi-year battle, and you are looking to limit the population. You're never going to be able to eradicate it. The way that they reproduce is in too high of a number. You just won't be able to find all the eggs. It's just not really possible because they're small. You can see in the picture here with the dime, the nickel here, though that's an egg cluster pod of grasshopper eggs. They're small, they're tiny, right? They're not very big in the way that they cluster. It makes it very difficult to see those with the naked eye. You can, but they're very small. And then when it comes to grasshoppers, one female can lay around 25 egg pods, which each of these little bits is an egg pod. And there are anywhere between 4 to 40 eggs in a pod, and that's 100 to 200 eggs per female per pod laying. So it's up to 500 eggs per laying batch per female. So if you think about how long, because they'll start mating in like late July, early August, and they'll go all the way to the first freeze and laying eggs. That's a lot of eggs, right? That's one female. And you can remember how dark our colors were on our maps. So if all of those were, and that was 15 plus individuals per square yard, if all 15 of those, or even half of those are females and are laying 500, right? That's a lot. You're not going to win, which is why we have to talk about management, not eradication. And plants can recover if you do your management right, which is what this top picture shows. So this is levels of soybean defoliation specifically on grasshoppers, and you can see what 5%, 10%, 20%, and on looks right. So from a plant perspective, if you can sit ideally in this 5 to 10%, are you going to get the highest yields? No, but is your plant going to survive through the next year? Yeah. If last year what we were sitting at was at this 40-50% where like nothing was surviving, and that really needed to be worked on. Threshold wise, because we'll talk about counts, the USDA threshold is 15 to 20 nymphs, again those immature ones, right? Or 8 to 10 adults per square yard. There's two methods that are done with this, either visual counts or sweep net. And they're actually looking at revising these numbers as of the 2025 National Grasshopper Management Board meeting. So for next year, those numbers might be a little different. So on one of the sheets that is attached, you're able to do counts, because this is what will give you, is my threshold too high, or is it getting to be too high to do something about it? Because that will tell you how much time do you have before you should do something about it. So again, we're looking at density, right? That density at what cost of damage will be greater than the cost of treatment. That threshold number varies with region, cost of treatment, where you're at in plant growth, the forage value, and that grasshopper development / species. Because like we said, if you're one that is mostly just restricted to grass feeding, but you're really focused in your garden where you have diversified plants, there's not really that much of a concern, right? They might eat it a little bit, but nowhere near to where you'll have an economic impact. So just things to keep in mind. So this is what is called a sequential binomial method. And what you want to do is you walk up to an area of a square yard and you count what hops or flies out of that square yard. If it's more than 2, then you can put that upper value. You want to do at least 10 of these, and the handout really walks you through how to do it, how to put the score on here. And if your score is really high, then you're sitting at too high of a threshold number and you need to do something. If you're seeing a lot of nips and you're below that 15 to 20, maybe it's 10. That's pretty close to that upper threshold, right? You would want to start thinking about some management. But if you only get 5 and you do 10 of these, then you know that it's pretty low. It's really not that big of a deal. So maybe you'll give it another week or 2 and then come out and recount again. Same thing with adults. If again, you're sitting really close to 8 or at 8 or higher, got to do something. If you're sitting at 2, you're doing okay, right? So just things to think about when you're doing these counts. And just for best practices, you want to do it when the wind is less than 15 miles per hour. Vegetation is not wet, so let that dew cook off, and the temperature's got to be below between 60 and 90. Anything higher than that, you won't get a whole lot of movement because they get a little hot. And then anything below that, they'll move a little slower, so it will be tougher to get accurate counts just because of the way that they work with heat from a biology standpoint. Hatching sites. All right, so hatching sites are nice because if you can find them, especially now as we enter into the springtime, really, our temperatures start to increase. You can flag it, start looking for how bad is your threshold numbers. You can start kind of making some observations in the field and kind of work through that. Because again, this is a seasonal approach. You're gonna have to do this the whole season. This isn't just a one and done silver bullet solution. This is something you have to keep working on the whole time. You want to look for anywhere there's a lot of plant coverage. Anytime over 60 degrees, they can start hatching. They'll be small. So what you see here are grasshoppers. The little like brown things coming out that look weird, they're grasshoppers. They're coming out of the eggs. They will stay around that hatching site for the first week and a half, depending on their species. And their legs aren't super solid, so they can't even really hop all that far. They're really just walking around. They're going to climb plant life, kind of stick close to that, really build up their strength as they develop. So if you can find these, flag them, and use them as a starting point for management and observation and counts, it's really, really helpful. So highly encourage you to get out onto your property, look for these hatching sites, especially like this week, the week of April 7th is going to be pretty warm. Might be a good idea to get out there in the field. All right, management controls. So most of you at some point have probably heard what's called IPM, or Integrated Pest Management. And what that means is this nice triangle image here. At the very, very top is chemical control. So that is the one we use the least amount of. And we go down the pyramid and have more practices that we try to use more of to limit the ecological impact. So when you think of IPM, I want you to think about what are your goals. If you have a small garden, that is, you know, not very big, then that opens us up quite a bit. If you have 40 plus acres, you're going to have to make some management decisions, right? And the difference between having a vegetable garden versus rangeland versus a monoculture cropland, they all have different goals, and you're going to need to use different controls, whether that be biological, mechanical, physical, chemical. It's all kind of a piece of that, right? A lot of people talk about birds and poultry engagement. Poultry are definitely a good way to go. Chickens will eat them, but they do get tired of them very quickly, and they're not insect selective, right? So even if you put them in a highly intense grasshopper area, if they've been eating grasshoppers for a hot minute, they may really be over it and not really go after them, because chickens are going to do what they're going to do. They're going to eat what they want to eat, regardless of what your desire is for them. They also can eat your plants, and they, you know, their feet can cause some ground disturbance, things like that, especially on young seedlings. Things like ducks, geese, and quail and pheasants have a better ratio of focusing on grasshoppers than chickens do most of the time, but you're welcome to use all of those. Using birdhouses, bird feeders to encourage native birds to your area that are specific for grasshopper control is helpful. We'll talk a little bit about those species specifically later on here in the slides. And then, of course, beneficial insects, robber flies, wasps, beetles, praying mantis, dragonflies. We'll kind of talk about some of those as we go through again, but again, you can always encourage some predators, but you want to be aware of those as we go up to like a chemical control, because a lot of these share similar biology, and the chemicals you could apply for grasshoppers can also impact your beneficials. So just be aware of that. And then same thing with insecticides, baits. You need to be careful with that because a lot of them can harm pollinators. And again, those beneficial insects, please read your labels, and we'll talk about PPE here in another slide. All right, so just some reminders here. Remember, younger the better when we're dealing with grasshoppers. Adults are very difficult to control. If it has wings at least half the length of its abdomen, then it's already an adult. So on this nice big picture, so right, this is their abdomen. So here from that like about hind leg, right, where it starts to stick up, that if their wing is at least half that length from the ovipositor, then you're already dealing with an adult, right? That's a really easy way to know. If it's a little baby wing and it's not one of the big guys, then you know you still have some time to deal with it. So definitely look for that. You want to aim for the third molt cycle. That third instar is really where you can have the most impact from a management perspective, because otherwise, you know, a lot of people have asked, can I do anything with it when they're still at an egg stage? No, unfortunately. You do have to wait to deal with grasshoppers until they're out and about from the eggs moving around. So just the things to think about. Application timing, if you're going to go from a chemical perspective, early in the morning is when they're the most active, but you want to wait until the dew has burnt off. Dew will slow them down when they're small, and it will slow how fast they move, how active they are. So you kind of want to wait, unless you know where they're pretty prevalent, you want to wait until that dew burns off and then really start applying stuff. So that's kind of what you want to do. And just, you know, watch the heat if you're going to do chemical control, because that can impact numbers, insect species, and direction of sprays. All right, going back into more organic or ecological management perspectives, birds. Birds are a really good way to encourage limited interaction with grasshoppers. So the biggest thing you need to think about is, again, species, right? The bigger the grasshopper, the more they have of what is called tobacco juice. Tobacco juice, see this black tar looking glob coming out of their mouth? It is a defense mechanism. It's a tar-like substance that is equivalent to what we humans know as tobacco juice. It doesn't taste good, it's smelly, it's acidic, it stains, and for birds, it can get sticky on their beaks and make it difficult for them to eat. So a lot of our smaller species don't like grasshoppers eating them whole because of the tar substance, but you'll see them maybe pluck off legs or something like that. That doesn't have to do with that tar because it's really in their head in that upper region. But there are species who can deal with that. So ones you want to deal with and encourage, the bigger the beak, the better it is for grasshoppers. So like things like robins, blue jays, killdeers really like grasshoppers. And this little guy here over on the right hand corner, this is a grasshopper sparrow, which is native to Colorado, and they are here in Pueblo. They go after all species, and they really like the big guys, so they're a good one to encourage as well. Other ones you can encourage are quail, grouse, pheasants, turkeys, and then if you hear about a grasshopper buzzard, which is our lower right picture here, that is a type of hawk. but they're only found in Africa. We don't have any of these guys here, unfortunately, on the North America continent. So if you hear that from Google, from AI this year, it is just a myth. They do not live on this continent, and unfortunately, they're not a tool we can use here. We do need to definitely encourage our more native species like the killdeer and the grasshopper sparrow that are just here naturally. All right, why is management critical? So we're going to share this short little video with you guys here. So I'm going to stop sharing and I will get that pulled up, and then you all can see. And I wanted to show this. This is from a video.
Are you looking into an outdoor kitchen but not sure if it...
So this video is from a Colorado farmer from last year, and he was on a organic situation. And I want to show this one because it's important to understand, why is that timing so important? Why do I want to do something early? Why do I want to care about the instars? Why do I want to know about species and do all this work, right? It's really easy for things to get out of hand, even for larger scale operators. If you don't do something early, you wind up behind the 8 ball and things can kind of get out of hand. So with that, let me show you the news clip from this producer in our state last year. Let me share my, and we'll take a listen.
If it's going to be worth it. In this video, we are going to discuss how an outdoor kitchen can pay for itself.
Why, yes, grasshoppers are everywhere this summer, and they're really having a devastating impact on farmers' crops and your backyard gardens. Well, tonight we're going to find out why they're showing up in swarms. We're glad you're with us for Denver 7 News at 6 tonight. I'm Shannon Ogden.
And I'm Jessica Crawford. So experts tell us the mild winter we had and the hot, dry spring allowed way more eggs to hatch earlier than usual. Denver 7's Danielle Kreuter traveled to Peyton for a first-hand look at the invasion.
Look at our cabbage.
Yosef Kamir has seen a lot in his 10 years as a farmer in Peyton.
I've just never seen it. It's mind-blowing.
This late in the season, his crews are starting all over.
We've turned all these beds and reseeded them. And so we've covered everything with something, this is called row cover.
And here's why. Grasshoppers, tons of them.
Everywhere you walk, you're just walking and they just will hit you in the face. The grasshoppers are everywhere.
And they're eating everything.
This is our rhubarb. This is our broccoli. It's hard to tell. I think this is our chamomile. That's horseradish. They're not supposed to eat horseradish. They're supposed to spray garlic spray to get rid of grasshoppers, but like, they destroyed our garlic, they destroyed our mint. They destroyed all of our chives. This is rhubarb.
It's cost the farm
It's all dead.
thousands of dollars so far, and there's only so much they can even do.
We're a regenerative and organic farm. We go to the utmost for purity standards. We don't use any chemicals.
So they're getting creative.
We got 4.5 pounds. That's 4,000 grasshoppers. It's unbelievable.
The infestation has been good for some members of the farm.
Here, chickies!
But that's about it.
We couldn't sell any of our basil. We couldn't sell any of our, so many other crops, so that's caused a tremendous heartache and struggle.
He knows he's far from the only Colorado farmer dealing with this heartache. He hopes people continue to support their local farmers market, even if this year the Swiss chard looks a little more like Swiss cheese.
It might not be as pretty of a year as, in years past, or as what you expect of the farmers market, but it's still pure, it's still good, and, ask your farmers questions and support them.
In Peyton, I'm Danielle Kreuter, Denver 7.
Chickens are...
Alrighty, so let me stop our share here. Okay, so that kind of gives you guys an idea of why management is so important, and we'll talk about kind of an important piece he brought up, which is the piece about garlic spray, because that is an interesting deal that we'll talk about as we get through the rest of these slides here. But if you don't do something, the numbers can spiral really fast. So taking the time to do this right is important. All right, so Getting into the weeds of organic options. Just as an FYI, many of you probably know this, but if you don't, organic doesn't mean there's no chemicals in it or it's not dangerous. It just simply means that it's not man-made. For example, like cyanide, that is something that is found naturally. It is considered organic just because people didn't create it in the lab. So something to think about. One easy way is to keep things mowed. So in those early stages, in the early part of the springtime, right, we've talked a lot about their life cycle, how they move, how they develop. Nymphs struggle to travel far without their wings, and especially in that first early week, their legs aren't super sturdy, so they can't really even hop super far. So if you keep things mowed, they're not going to go super far. They're not going to be able to do a lot of damage, and especially if you don't have any of the migratory species, they're not going to fly super far into your yard, right? They're going to stay more on the fringes, or they'll be pushed out onto a different piece of property where there is more food, where there are things that are a little maybe more unkept, where they're going to be able to eat a lot, not have to move a lot. Another really good way is using flour, just regular white flour. You want to use it through a sifter, put it over the plants. Again, if they're past that 4th instar stage, this won't really work because their mouth parts are bigger than the flour particles. But what it does is it sticks to their mouth and it makes it where they can't really eat. And with enough application, you can limit their numbers. This does have to be applied after rainstorms. It is safe for the plants, but again, you only want to apply it if you're actively seeing grasshoppers. You don't want to do most of these things if you're not seeing them. Neem oil is another one. It is considered a natural pesticide. However, it's really, really toxic to pollinators, like bees specifically. So you want to use it at dusk when the bees have already returned to the hives. And what it does is it works to halt or stop growth. It's oil from pressed neem seed. So again, it is considered an organic gardening option, but you really want to be careful that you're not impacting any pollinators if you choose to use that. Diatomaceous earth is another good one. You can make rings around your plants, things like that. You can make barriers around your garden beds if you have raised beds, stuff like that. But again, that only really works, again, if they are 4th instar stage or lower. Anything below that doesn't really necessarily work too well on them. It can bother them, but it won't necessarily kill them. Sprinkling boric acid, kaolin clay is another one, and then doing a natural bait bucket. So you want to do 10% molasses to 90% water, and grasshoppers can smell really well if you don't know that. Smell is a big thing for them because they deal a lot with pheromones and they like sweet things. So if you put out a bait bucket, please be aware that it acts as an attractant. If you don't have a lot of grasshoppers in your garden, but maybe you have them, you know, where a hatching site is over by a bush or a shrub, put the bait bucket there. Don't put it by your flowers where there are no grasshoppers because they will smell it, they will come to it. And then of course some will fall in and will drown because of the viscosity difference between the two, and others may not and will wind up munching on your garden and your flowers. So just be aware of that. You don't have to use a lot of it. If you want to do it in a small like dog dish, especially when they're small grasshoppers, you can do that, and that way it's lesser quantity of molasses. And even if it's, you know, further in the season, you don't have to do a whole 5-gallon bucket. You can do half of that, a quarter of that, because they have really strong smells. Sense of smell, so you can do a little bit and still have a pretty big impact. But just be aware, it is an attractant. What kills them is the drowning effect, not the actual mixture itself. Alright, the myths. So I love that in the clip he talks about garlic spray. So if you put in how to control grasshoppers with garlic into Google, AI will tell you can create a garlic spray and that it acts as a repellent. That actually is not necessarily true. Garlic works as kind of like an attractant. So what you're doing is you're ringing the dinner bell. It will cause them to come, right? And it will encourage them to come in. But if you're doing that around somewhere you want to trap them or bait them or whatever, you can certainly do that. But just be aware of that it's not always the best idea. And that AI is not always the most trusted source of information. You do want to look at certified research from either a university or another institution that has backup certified research to their claims. And again, you want to know the species, right? You want to know where they're at in their life cycle. It's not a one and done solution. There's no silver bullet. Plant mesh does work, but at a certain stage, they can eat through that. So just be aware of that. And everything else we've kind of already talked about. So just be aware it's a multi-season attack. It's never a one and done thing, no matter what control method you're going with. All right, insecticides worth the money. So anything I talk about here or show are not products being specifically endorsed by CSU Extension. These are just used as educational tools and examples. It doesn't mean I'm endorsing one particular product, company, or anything like that. Again, we really want to know the species and the life cycle because that's really important. When even if you're going the chemical route, you need to read the labels because some sprays will kill on contact. Others are ones that they have to ingest them. So you need to spray it on the plant, not on the insect. Sprays are less expensive than dusts or baits, but it can be where, you know, if you don't know your life stage, you do it too late, you're just going to wind up wasting your money, right? Dust can be reapplied and they don't really stick to plants, which is good. If you know where you have a heavy concentration, you can get a lot of grasshoppers at once. And then baits are nice because they stay low and they don't really have an impact on our pollinators and other things like that that are going to fly higher because the baits stay on the ground. The biggest part, regardless of what you're using, if you're going to go the chemical route, you need to know the chemicals. That's the biggest deal. Any of the chemicals you see here are ones that will directly affect grasshoppers. The biggest one a lot of people ask me about is carbile. So a lot of people know this brand name. The brand name is 7, right? Not every 7 chemical has carbile in it, whether it be a spray, a dust, or a bait. You need to look for that specific ingredient because 7 is just the trade name of the product. It has nothing to do with the ingredient. That's what you need to know. You need to know the chemical, less about the brand name. So if you do go into a store and you get 7 because you're like, oh, I know it works for grasshoppers, make sure it has this chemical or one of the others in order to make sure it's actually going to be effective for grasshoppers specifically. That's the biggest takeaway. Eco bran is a really common bait. It's a granular wheat bran infused with 2% carbile, right? You get death within 18 hours to 3 days, and it's low risk. You don't need a whole lot of it. They eat it, they ingest it, and that's how it gets into their system. And it's pretty safe for people and for pets. So if you're a little worried about chemicals, but maybe you get in the weeds of all this and if the levels get high, you know you need to do something. Organic's just not cutting it. I would tell you maybe a bait would be the best one to go for because it has the least ecological negative impact compared to like a dust or a spray that is a lot harder to control as far as your impact level goes. Baits are a lot more helpful. And just be aware that most of these insecticides are not selective, right? You can harm pollinators and you can harm a lot of predatory insects like praying mantis, beetles, things like that that are also going to eat the grasshoppers. So I just wanted to show this slide, which is read the label, right? This is just an example label from the National Pesticide Information Center, but there are some important things I want to highlight here. So the biggest thing is on the front of any chemical you're going to buy, it says active ingredient, right? And it's going to give you the amount. This is really important. This is where you want to have that list of ingredients, and some of the handouts I provide with this show you the specific ingredients you want to look for when we talk about chemical use. So that's a really big one. That's huge. The other big part is first aid. I really want to point this out because if you are using a spray, a dust, anything like that, where if it gets windy all of a sudden, and maybe you were not wearing sunglasses, you are standing in the downshift wind direction with that spray or that dust, and it gets into your eyes, it gets into your lungs, that can cause a lot of issues for you from a first aid perspective. And some of these chemicals don't react well with water. So if you get it in your eye and it's really irritating, you might run to go flush it out, and then might have a really bad chemical reaction with water and wind up doing more damage to your eyes. So, and obviously if your eyes are already jacked up, you're not going to be able to read the first aid on the bottle. So please read that beforehand, just in case something does happen. You know what to do. You know how the chemical will react. Easy peasy. The other big things is directions for use. That's going to be on the back. They're usually like one of the very first things. That's also really big because some of these chemicals are, again, very sensitive to temperature, to wind, to all these other things. There might be a specific time of day that they say is best for it. This is also going to tell you how much to apply. So this is all really, really important that you need to really look at that active ingredient. You need to look at directions for use, first aid, and then precautionary statements. So how can the product be used safely? This, if you have pets, children running around, things like that, and you're worried about how, once I put this down, how soon can I go back into that area? If it's on a vegetable, how soon could I eat it? All that stuff. That will be put here, and we'll have the information here. So again, I highly encourage you guys to look at these labels, read it, understand what it is. And if it's not the right choice for you and your family, let's go with something different. There's lots of options. All right, these are our beneficials. So like praying mantis are really good ones. You guys can see them here. A lot of times, some of our local places like Ace Hardware, Foxes, you can buy a bunch of them. But just remember, you need to know the proper way to release them. Praying mantis are territorial and they will eat each other. So if you release all of them in one spot, you're going to wind up with only one out of however many you had in the container. So please make sure you read the directions about how to release them so you can get the most benefit out of your praying mantis. They like marigolds and roses. They are like predator, ambush predators. So they like shady shrubbery plants to hide in to have the most impact. Dragonflies, that's another big one, right? They do eat grasshoppers, but you need to have a little bit of water. They are an aquatic insect. So even if you have a little bit of a pond, a fountain, something with a water lily, something like that to attract them, that will be how you get dragonflies. No one really likes wasps, but if you can leave the yellow jackets and the paper wasps alone on an area of your property where they are the least disruptive to your home, to your family, to your pets, I would encourage you to do so, because the nests, they will eat grasshoppers. They will take them back, and you can always deal with the wasp later on in the season when the grasshoppers are lower. So just things to think about. Robber flies, they really like marigolds and sunflowers. They are like a parasitic type of insect, so they eat grasshoppers, infect them, and their eggs pop out, kind of like the movie Alien. And then blister beetles, ground beetles will eat them, and we've already talked about birds and poultry. But these guys are kind of the main species you want to think about encouraging. All right, so the other thing you can think about, whether you're doing this organically, you're going to do a mixture of organic and chemical, you're going to do lots of different things. You could also make areas of plant sacrifices. Wherever you're going to make plant sacrifices, keep those ones tall and watered. Grasshoppers do have favorites that they like to eat. So this vegetable host insect matrix, borrowed from the Master Gardener program from CSU Extension, shows you that wherever the dots are, that is a plant that they really like. Now, as we all know, grasshoppers in high enough numbers will eat everything and anything. They do just have favorites. Are there things they don't like? Absolutely. Does it mean they won't eat them? No. It just means that if in lower numbers, you can use these guys to really target them in specific areas and then maybe put like a bait bucket, right? And trap them in certain areas. So some of the favorites you guys can see here are like beans, broccoli, cabbage, carrots, corn, cauliflower, corn, marigolds. They really like a lot of those. And if you remember, on our other side, marigolds are also a favorite of a lot of our beneficial insects. So maybe you want to have just a patch of marigolds that you just know are sacrifices. You keep them tall and watered as much as you can, and that's the area you're just going to let the bugs go to town on. So just things to think about if you're looking for other options. All right, I do want to put out a blister beetle warning. Blister beetles are a type of beetle we have here in Colorado. We have 3 species, and they follow grasshopper infestations because they go after the eggs. They're the biggest issue for livestock animals, specifically horses, because grasshoppers really like alfalfa specifically, and the beetles wind up chasing them into the fields. Then what happens is when the fields get cut and dried and raked and get ready to be into the windrows and baled, the beetles get caught in the machinery, and then they get killed and crushed and dried, and like only a couple of these can kill a horse. So, and they cause blister sores in most livestock animals when they're eaten. So the worst one to be worried about is the 3-striped blister beetle is the one of most concern. The other ones are also toxic, but they usually just create sores. They don't necessarily cause death. The best way to limit the beetles is to, when you're in that drying time for hay, is just leave them in the windrow or do like an extra pass with a rake so that they get up and they fly out so they don't get crushed when you're putting them into the baler. So that's a really good way. We do have other handouts about how to deal with them specifically if you want to spray, but most of the time the beetles will leave. If you just kind of shake them up a little bit, they'll take off and get out of the field and not have that impact. All right, so that's the biggest thing, and so that kind of gives you an idea of what it looks like for this year for Pueblo and most of southern Colorado from the maps from the USDA. Again, like I said, I will be creating that form that will ask you, one, are you okay with a count being done on your private property? What are the levels you're seeing? What are the species? What are your management goals? You know, all of that good stuff. And then working with the USDA, we will be doing some more counts this year to just create a better picture of what's happening to our areas from an insect level, as that it winds up impacting everything else when we talk about agriculture and just growing food, whether that be in a big or a small space. So please look for that. I will have that publicly posted. If you're ever curious about getting the form, you can't find it, please make sure you can, that is my work cell phone there, or you can call our main number, which is 719-583-6566. And any of the ladies who answer the phone call that run kind of our front office operations can also assist you to that form. It's not out yet. Right now, today is April 7th, so please be aware of that. It will be coming in the next week or so to collect some data. You're always welcome to contact me and see if it is open if you can't find it. So with that, we'll go ahead and end this presentation. I appreciate you all jumping on and watching. And if you have further questions, you want some more one-on-one conversation, feel free to reach out. I do encourage you to reach out through that work cell phone number that was on the other slide, as right now our landlines are not sharing voicemails to anything I can access in the field, and I'm very rarely directly in the office as the season is starting to get pretty busy. So please feel free to call, text, or email, then call the landline number. Because I will not, I won't get it very quickly. So with that, thanks for watching, and feel free to reach out if you have other questions. Hopefully this was helpful to you.